Hey, this is Zac.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exo-terra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exo-terra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exo-terra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top quality terrariums, Exo-terra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exo-terra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last episode of CCR for 2024. So, as always, Zach's here with brother from another mother, Clint. How you doing, man?
Doing great, buddy. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Semester's over. I did a rocket run to Costa Rica. It was only a 4-day trip, but it was pretty eventful. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. Now it's funny. Up until now, I've had to do all the administrator jobs associated with me being the chair of my department. And now I have 4 weeks to do 6 months of science with Christmas and New Year's and getting family time in there. So that's a pretty normal thing for somebody in my position. So I was up at school today doing crayfish work, actually, with some of the crayfish grad students, which it's funny because that's all I used to do back in the good old days. Now that I have become important, I did air quotes there. All the fun has been sucked away. So anyway, so yeah, no. Yeah, I can't really complain though. I'm looking forward to getting a lot done. And I've also throttled down on the hognose book. Every spare second I get, I'm reading a hognose paper or reading a species account out of a book, taking notes like a madman. I talked with John last week, and we have big plans for 2025. I've got a hard deadline. I'm not going to miss this deadline. So there'll be lots of hognose book updates over the next months. I'm sure life for you is great, given we're rolling into Christmas, and there's plenty of people that want to pet gecko.
It's wild, man, and I'll talk about it, during the market update here in a second. But it's different. It's different this season. It's different, really? but it's not, and that's what's strange. And so I'll explain that in a little bit. But things have been going okay around here. We're knocking out, and I say this all the time, project after project, and it seems like the projects continue to be endless. What I'm working on right now, we're upgrading a lot of things in the nursery. And by upgrading, we're still utilizing, rack systems in the nursery, but I'm inputting larger rack systems. What I'm doing is I'm using VE6s, the Bavarium Electronics 6s, where you have 3 different size tubs that you can utilize in the same space. And they're a lot deeper than what a lot of babies are. Yeah. And I love
those
them.
Are those.
Yeah. And so I'm kind of doing several of those. And the thought process is we're having animals that we're keeping longer than whenever I was doing this out of my basement, so they're getting more size on them. They need more space, but we're hatching out blue beauties, black milk, and things that need bigger than a hatchling tray kind of right off the bat. So I want to be able to have much better caging and space, for all these different, if we're going to continue working with such a wide variety in that one room. So that's what we're doing right now. And we're putting everything on wheels. So I mean, it's even now that we have the Metazotics line thermostats, where for every VE6, even though it's 3, they're stacked 3 tall, each one has its own thermostat on the back, which gives us more flexibility with the wide, range of animals we're keeping. So I can have this one set to 72, this one set to 84, if we, whatever it is we need in that same stack. So just things like that. And then I'm still working on building some cages for the pine snakes, the gopher snakes, things like that. They're larger and, lots of upgrades, really trying to get those in place. But we've had some other cool projects too that I guess I can share this because, this didn't come to fruition, but it's had a very cool outcome, I guess, at the same time. So we were in discussion with another company at potentially taking on a second location.
Yeah.
Yeah. Metazotics was looking at it. It was sooner than what I wanted and was planning. But it was, if we were able to make something work, it was we're going to take it. And we couldn't come up with the right number for one another. No hard feelings there at all. We agreed on that going in, that if we couldn't, we couldn't. But what it forced me to do was to sit down and really calculate what it would take for us to open a second location. And, for us, a second location wouldn't be a 9,000 square foot facility like this. It would be a 1,500 square foot just reptile shop that was fed through the hub, which we are, here. And it was very obtainable for us to be able to make that happen. So that's now potentially on the 2025 radar.
Yeah, it'll be done by June.
We have 3 cities right now that we're looking at, and so it was interesting, and nobody hold me to that. That it's in 2025. A lot of things can happen.
By June, but
I
know how you work, Clint. I've watched it over the past year.
It's I've seen well, like I said, it forced me to actually crunch the numbers and see how close we were. And once we hit another target where I feel we can completely do that and have a substantial fallback fund in case, things slow down, where we don't have to take any type of loan or use any borrowing power, then
nice.
Go ahead and get this trigger pulled. So
that's cool.
Yeah. Fun Very stuff cool. There. A lot of neat things.
Yeah. Well, I had a fun interaction over the weekend with my trip to Costa Rica. So
that you did.
Most people go to Costa Rica.
Was that the trip I was on?
Yeah. No,
that's right. That's the trip I wasn't invited at all and was in no way bitter about.
You're still not bitter.
Nope. Not even a little.
I'm perfectly fine with it.
Not even a little.
Yeah. So anyway, I have a student. If you went to Colubrid Fest, you met him, Zac Kaminsky, and he is doing his thesis on tarantulas. And interestingly, in the realm of people who have podcasts, Richard Stewart, Tarantula Collective, I think that's right. He's based in Wheeling. I think we've talked about this before. He's a mile away from here. Zac takes care of his spiders. Zac wanted to do a thesis with tarantulas. I like tarantulas. I've kept tarantulas. And the university has a relationship with this wonderful place called Natua, which is in the Guanacaste province of Costa Rica. It's a wildlife rehabilitation facility, and it's there's definitely shady versions of that in Costa Rica. This is not that. Natua has several government contracts. The guy that runs it is amazing. They have resident biologists. It's fantastic. And when I took students there the first time, it was the first time I'd been to Costa Rica. I'm walking around and was like, what the hell are these crayfish burrows? Because that's what my brain went to. And they were actually Costa Rica zebra knee, Phenopelma samani burrows. And they're all over Natua. So Zac said he wanted to do that, tarantula research. He went with me on that trip. So we worked it out. And so he's just basically going down there and gathering tremendous amounts of environmental data to then make tarantula keeping better. And so I needed to check in on him because he has had limited field experience because he's a keeper. And so I kind of set him down there, and then I usually roll in and make sure my students are doing okay in the field. So that was why this was such a short trip. Well, I think I mentioned this in the previous episode. Zac sent me 5 days before we got down there a picture of what we call in herpetoculture a Stewart eye, Stewart's milk snake. It's now called the tropical tricolored milk snake because they're all not tricolored. I don't understand that. Lampropeltis abnorma, but back in the day, it would have been Lampropeltis triangulum Stewart eye. We also call them Stewart eye. And I have Stewart eye from Guanacaste, Costa Rica. That's the lineage locality because I knew I was going there all the time. And I lost my crap and said to Zac, keep tabs on where you saw those. And where they actually were hanging out is kind of fun. This snake was in a very large parrot enclosure that had metal steel tubing as kind of the architecture of the enclosure, and it was using one of the tubes as its burrow. So they saw it like up in the chain link, and then they spooked it, and it went down the chain link into this hole. And then I told Zac, keep tabs on it. So we flew out of Pittsburgh. Anybody listening that's flown out of Pittsburgh knows Pittsburgh's become an early morning hub, but the TSA doesn't open up until like 4, and there's a lot of flights at 5. So it's a nightmare, and it's one of those where you have to get up and be standing there at 3 to get out by 5. Like it's a night. It's horrible. So I told Zac, myself and another professor were flying into him. We were up all night. Took forever to get there, but we were going to get there. And I said, the first thing we're doing is we're going to go look for that snake. Now, we've all had snakes escape in our houses. I've thought about this a lot. And this is a confined, limited space. And we can't find those damn things half the time. So I'm going to the freaking jungle to look for one snake. So I knew expectations were extremely low. So, flew into Fort Lauderdale, flew from Fort Lauderdale to Costa Rica, hopped on a bus, drove into Natua, ate dinner. It gets dark down there at 5:30 because you're on the equator. And by 6:30 that evening, I'm at that parrot's enclosure looking for this, milk snake. Completely convinced there's no chance in hell of finding the milk snake. The other rule, which everybody needs to know, is you are not allowed to yell and scream in the animal sanctuary. Okay? That's important for this because, it's an animal sanctuary. So I'm looking with my headlamp, can't find the snake, not really expecting much. Get to the end of the enclosure, and I just casually looked down on the ground, and right there on top of a bed of leaves with nothing around it, completely exposed, is the freaking steward eye. And it was one of those deals where I looked, and if you're a herper, you know what I'm talking about. Like, your brain registered, there it is, but then your brain also registered, there's no way in hell.
Yes, that can't be it.
That can't be there.
Yeah.
And so I apparently went like, huh? And then I yelled an expletive that rhymes with truck. And then dove head first, into the bushes. And you're, one of the rules of the sanctuary, which is good, is they don't want you holding wild animals, but there was no way I wasn't getting a picture. And these are the best pictures, if you're watching on YouTube, of the steward eye. And what is amazing is I have taken these very crappy cell phone pics because I didn't bring my camera, and that's also why we found it, and compared it to the animals here in this room, and they're identical. It's freaking. So now it's done. Found it in the wild. Have it here. They'll be here until I die. Like that's
nice. Nice.
That's just the way it was. And what was really interesting, this is fun. So here I am. I teach herpetology. I know the Macrurus, the coral snakes, and then the milk snakes and the mimicry and the da-da-da. This thing was snappy, and there were about the first 2 strikes. I was like, you can't. I'm not entirely certain this isn't a coral. It's just not a coral. I'm not entirely certain this isn't a coral. So it was kind of interesting to be in nature and where it could be a coral. I knew it wasn't a coral, but still my brain would it was really cool to experience what that mimicry evolved to do, which was really, really cool. So
it's so funny. I've been not in that kind of situation, but I know exactly what you're talking about because for me, there's been times field herping, not so much in Indiana, but on outside of it, because they're not in Indiana anymore. But water moccasins, they're going to be in Kentucky, they're going to be in Missouri, and there's times I've come across whether it's a water snake or even sometimes garters will flatten and huff up and all that, and it's like that brief. Is it? No, it's a wait before I grab it. It's so I know exactly that. Where if you saw a picture of it, you would know exactly what it was. But when it's right there in real life, in real time, you're second guessing yourself.
Well, they do have one of the corals is there. I can't remember off the top of my head. It might be the Costa Rican coral snake. And we found them there. And I knew this wasn't that, but still, it was really kind of fun to experience what one of the mammals down there that's learned. It was evolution in action. But the other thing that was really funny is, so I get my hands on it and I can't yell. And everybody that knows me knows that when I find what I'm looking for, I devolve into a 10-year-old psychotic child that is bouncing around, all 260 pounds of me, just screaming in the top of my lungs. And I couldn't do that because there was a freaking tapir 100 meters to the left of me that were lost its mind. So there was a lot of like air screaming is what it was described as. But yeah, no, this was the highlight. This is the best.
That's really cool.
Yeah, this was definitely cool. And then we found a bunch of other stuff, which was mostly common. We found something called a long-tailed snake, and then a whole bunch of this snake, Leptodira septrianalis. I think it's one of the cat-eyed snakes. It's like Costa Rica's garter snake. You find them everywhere, but they just don't get old to me. They look like boiga to me, or Madagascar cat-eyed snakes. And they're dipsadded with a rear fang and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, no. So that was my highlight. I'm going to take this off the screen. But yeah, so it was really cool to go herping in December. And then I came back to the gray nothingness that is an upper Ohio Valley winter. So, and we'll be here until March. But yeah, that's my update. That was fun. So
very cool. Very cool. I'm jealous, man.
I got one more thing real quick. So one thing, I am not questioning our milk keeping friends. It's going to sound like I am. So one thing that I just can't get past is this part of Costa Rica. It's the lowland. It's the dry shrub forest. It's freaking hot. I mean, it's hot. Like from noon to 2, it's like 88 degrees with 80% humidity. Heat index is like pushing 90. And then with Zac's thesis, one of the things we were doing is we were taking we were taking the temperature in the tarantula burrows. And the temperature in the tarantula burrows was consistently in like the upper 70s, like pushing 80 degrees. It was pushing 80 degrees at 11:30 at night. And I'm not saying we should cook our tropical milk snakes. I am not saying that. But what just made me question a lot is like, why are we keeping these things like they're montane or cold? I was having a hard time wrapping my brain around that. So it's just an example of where you might question things a little bit if you get out in the field and actually experience it in habitat. And I understand there's different microhabitats and everything, and I'm certain they can get to 70 degrees during the course of their day. But those tarantula burrows, they were only getting to 70 degrees near sunup when they had gone literally as long as they could go without solar radiation. And then they were ramping up internally, that internal temperature. It was ramping up into the high 70s within a matter of like 3 hours. So I might be doing a little bit of experimentation here with the way I keep my steward eye, because that was really, really, really interesting to me. So
good stuff, man. Good stuff.
Right. I'm done now.
I'm glad you had such a fine trip, my friend.
Yes.
While I stayed in wet,
in Evansville,
raining,
I know,
cold.
You took one for the team, man. You had to keep that shop alive.
I saw more snakes than you did.
You definitely did. Yeah.
Well, do we want to jump into the updates?
Sure.
Market updates? All right. I'll go ahead and kick off the market updates. The market update is, as always, sponsored by the Show Me Reptile Show and the Show Me Marketplace. The Show Me Marketplace is actually running 50% off of a year subscription right now. I believe that's if you're a vendor, you're able to get an entire year for your store on the Show Me Marketplace for $100. If you're not a vendor of a Show Me show, it's $125 with that 50% off. So, and there's no limit. You can put as many animals on there as you want. And that's pretty cool. So it's something that Mickey and I chatted about. I guess I should update this. If you are in the Colubrid Fest Facebook group, you already saw this. And if not, right, this is a big deal and it's a big part of the market, right? So Colubrid Fest is moving.
Bum, bum, ba-dum.
Yeah, we said that, we guaranteed it was going to be in Indianapolis again. We said it was 95% sure, and the 5% seems to have won. But it's all for the right reasons.
Yes,
Colubrid Fest will be held in Fort Wayne, Indiana. If you're not familiar with where Fort Wayne, Indiana is, it's about 2 hours, hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours north of Indianapolis. It's right about 2 hours north of the Indianapolis airport. For those who are going to be attending Colubrid Fest or wanting to, here's some specifics on it. It will be held at I believe it's the Allen County Coliseum.
Yes.
Allen County Memorial Coliseum. It is a huge convention center arena. It's super nice. Mickey and his team already has a show in this arena, in this Coliseum, and so there's already a relationship. They know all the loading in, the loading out. This venue wants us to be there. So it's all that's great. Parking is $8 versus the $30 to $50 it was.
I paid $65 the one day.
Yeah, it's insane. So the parking is very reasonable. For those who are wanting to vend, the electricity in Indianapolis was $150 additional on top of your table. It's free at the Fort Wayne show. It's also, we're looking at utilizing about 12,000 square feet for the show. I think that's what it was, 12, whatever that number was. Because I may be wrong on that number. When I was looking at the venue, what we're wanting to utilize is only a third of this gigantic area, which means we can grow and grow and grow. And that's very exciting. It's still looking at September.
Yep.
Mickey is working on locking down the exact dates in September because there's, some are taken, and with it being the holidays, we're not getting responded to as quickly. But that's where it's going to be. It should be in September. We'll get those dates out as soon as we have it. Once we have the dates locked in, Zac and I will then jump on getting a hotel block. We are looking for a hotel where we can all hang out afterwards. I told Zac we need a bar. It's
a bar.
Yes, we're going to have, that kind of just everybody gets to hang out, have a good time. But things are rolling. And we expect these hotels to be even cheaper than they were in Indianapolis because it isn't as big of a city. Now, I will also say Fort Wayne isn't a tiny little bitty city in either. It is the second largest city in Indiana. The only city larger is Indianapolis. Now, I know there's a lot of you thinking, but it's Indiana. How big can it be? I get it. But still going to be a good time. And I'm really excited, and hopefully we will have this updated, and we're crossing fingers to have it locked in before the new year strikes, but we'll see how that goes with the holidays. So definitely needed to put that out there. Okay. Continuing with the market update and what I've been seeing. So it's a soft Christmas. And it's surprising because when I say soft, so for Metazotics throughout this entire year, you guys heard me talk about comp and the comp number, which is comparable to last year. Every month we have typically comped about 40% or more over the year prior, which again, that's a very great comp number, but you expect that out of a young company that is ramping up and growing, exponentially in the first few years. There's only been one month so far this year that we only comped 10% up. And so that felt very slow. And I mean, it's still a 10% growth month. This month, so far in December, we're actually negative 1.4% to comp in December. Whoa. Now, negative 1.4% is basically flat. It's not, anything incredible, but we have not experienced that at all this year. We've never been, in a negative comp, and it's a very slight one, which basically it's funny too, because we have felt like it's very slow. Now, last year, I would remember, all Christmas was really busy. But then I'm looking at the numbers and it's, well, we're doing the same damn thing we did last year as far as volume, but but we have more staff now. Our processes are better. So things are so much more streamlined and fluid, and things feel easier to us, which then feels less busy. Um, and it's so then I look at it as, okay, that's what's going on inside Metazotics. What am I seeing outside of Metazotics? And here's a couple other examples. Now, it's not only an example of the slowdown in this season, but it's also a shift in our culture as a society. So I stopped by Best Buy. I needed to pick something up at Best Buy. And I stopped by Best Buy in Evansville is located where probably most Best Buys are, kind of right at the crossroads of your busiest shopping area, that intersection. And I had zero problem getting to it. And this was last weekend. So you're talking about, you only have one more weekend before Christmas. And so normally shopping is already heavy on that weekend. I had no problem with traffic getting in there. I pulled up in the third spot from the door. And it was open. I walked in. I was immediately able to get assistance. I had to wait on no one. I grabbed what I needed. I walked up to the counter where there was not a single customer checking out but me. I checked out and I left. This was on a Saturday. And that right there tells you, one, it's a much softer, time, but I think so much is online shopping now than what there ever has been. And we know that. We know so much, but it was incredible for me to see it at this time right then.
On that same line of thought, kind of kick back to Costa Rica. I was talking with Rodolfo, the guy that runs that sanctuary, and they run a thing where volunteers from the States and Europe can pay a small amount to live on site and then take care of the animals. It's kind of a really common model of ecotourism over there. And Rodolfo said this season was the slowest season he's ever had. Like and at first I thought, you mean post-COVID? And he was like, no, like in the 22 years I've been doing this, 2024, Costa Rica's had less tourism than any other year. So it just speaks to the situation we all find ourselves in. So
and I think that there's multiple reasons that this is occurring. You've got, we're now towards what I would consider, I hope, the end of the COVID snapback. Where, you had a major course correction from where everybody had money and was spending money. And then now, inflation has shot up and we're kind of getting slapped back down to where we probably should have been, all along. Combine that with the fear of, if foreign tariffs are put in place from the United States, what that's going to actually do to product prices in the States. There's obviously concern there. It's funny because it's not the American buyer necessarily that's got that on their mind and is being cautious. It's the American businesses that are already starting to implement things that will cost the American public more because they're preparing. Corporations aren't going to take less profit. That's just not how they operate. So it's already happening. And so I think there's a lot of that going in, and let's face it, it's not like things just suddenly got soft this month. We've already, this entire year, not just in reptiles, but across all industries, things softened up because, prices are high. We talk about eggs, milk, and gas and, where those prices fall. And I think whenever you, and I'm just giving numbers here just to give an example. If $100 is your typical everyday amount, you don't notice a 5% dip as much because it's only $5, right?
Yeah.
Well, in these peak times of year, which is going to be Black Friday and the Christmas retail season, that $100 may suddenly jump up to $10,000. But then a 5% loss on 10,000 is a lot more than $5, right? You start to then see and feel, that particular piece. And I think that's what's happening right now. So it's very interesting. Those are the numbers pieces I wanted to throw, out there on what I'm seeing. There's also something that, again, I like to talk about market influence and what can affect us, whether it's going to be a positive or a negative. And there's a potential negative that's now looming out there that is, I'm not thrilled to know about. And I'd heard about this, and instead of me really taking a deep dive on it, I'm going to give some big credit and shouts here. So we're going to call it Reptile King because that's what Dylan, is it Perrone? Am I saying it? Perrin.
Yep.
Dylan Perrin. So Dylan hosts Animals at Home, the Animals at Home podcast. And Dylan, if you hear this, I want you to know you're one of maybe 4 podcasts that get put on the TV here at Metazotics. We are fans. I enjoy your show. I enjoy what you do. You're good at it. So Dylan just dropped an episode that I'm telling you guys need to go watch because it's phenomenal. And what it's about, the same individual that did the documentary, The Tiger King, which all of us sitting at home during COVID, watch this, binge this. And I'm going to tell you, it was entertaining as hell. I enjoyed it. I mean, thought it was hilarious. Well, that individual, and we're not wanting to blame the documentaries, but big cat legislation then took place after that, because I mean, obviously those who, if you've not seen The Tiger King, we'll just say it cast anyone and everyone that kept big cats in a very negative light. Okay.
Go to Walmart and buy those hot dogs.
Right. And now, given the individuals that were on the show probably should have been cast in a negative light. Don't get me wrong, but it then blanketed the entire, keeping community of big cats. Well, the individual did. Go ahead.
Or were you going to talk about Chimp Crazy?
Yes.
Okay.
The individual did the same thing with Chimp Crazy, which now I want to admit I've only seen bits and pieces of that. I've not watched it. Right. However, there has then been legislation on primate keepers, and it's wiped that out. So now that same individual is doing a documentary on the reptile industry.
It could even be a docuseries too.
Yeah, well, that's what I say. Documentary. Forgive me. It is. I can guarantee you, it's going to be a docuseries. That's how he operates, and again, he's good at what he does. The problem is he's an individual that is making something that he wants the masses to feed on. And so it's going to be sensationalized. It's going to, there's going to be drama. And the individual who is highlighted through this is Tom Crutchfield. Tom Crutchfield is, he's very well known in this hobby with a lot of different emotions. I mean, there's going to be things that we have to thank Tom for. There's going to be things that you want to ask him why the hell you even did that. There's just a lot there to unpack. But the problem is and again, this is not a shot at Tom at all. Tom has, I think, convicted twice of smuggling, I believe. And with that under his belt, again, this is the individual that he's putting at the forefront. There are other individuals, one of which is Jeff
Leibowitz.
Thank you.
Whatever the hell.
And now I'm going to flat out say this one. I'm not going to pull punches with this guy at all, because I don't see any good whatsoever you've done for the hobby. You're an idiot. And I'm sorry for any of those that like this man, but what he does and what he posts out there is going to ruin things for everyone at some point. Free handling venomous pisses me off. Period.
He got bit by an inland taipan.
Yes.
And then didn't have the antivenin, and then put on social media, hey, anybody got this antivenin? Like, what? Yeah, I can't talk about that guy. I'll just let everybody know this. I'm pretty sure I did a 20-minute rant in the herpetology class I taught this fall about what not to do, and it was just on him. So there you go.
And that's so again, when it comes to Tom, I like Tom. I do. There's a lot of things, and I mean, and it's I look at it as I'm not overlooking the bad things Tom has done, but I do understand it was a different time. It was a different mentality back then on what was right and what was wrong. And I think Tom has evolved a lot since then, where Jeff, no, there's no excuse whatsoever for
protoplasmic goop.
Yes.
That just went extinct.
And forgive me, everyone, because I think our listeners know this isn't really something we do. We don't do this. Yes. But so anyways, he's also featured in this docuseries. So the reason I want to point this out is this is not a good thing for our hobby, our discipline, our industry, because it's going to highlight the worst, more than likely, which is weird. The individual making this was a reptile keeper. Yeah. I don't know if he still is, but he was. So maybe we're wrong. Maybe he's going to completely do this in a different light, but I highly doubt it. Because going out and making a series on all the great things about reptiles is not going to pull in the masses.
And Dylan makes that point.
Right. And so without, this is something literally I could spend 2 hours talking about. Dylan did. So I'm not going to, and I'm not going to be able to do it better than he did. So check out the Animals at Home podcast. And he's calling it Reptile King. That doesn't mean that's what the title is going to be. That's just what Dylan was calling it, because it's going to be, similar to Tiger King. And give it a watch, give it a listen, because Dylan walks through the entire story from beginning to end beautifully. I mean, so well that I called Zac after watching it this morning, and I'm like, man, if you've not watched this yet, you need to, because he was brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it was really good. Really, really good. So that's the market update from me, my friend.
Okay. Well, I'm doing the science update now, and I'm doing this first, so I don't screw this up this time. The science update is brought to us by Rare Genetics, Inc., Ben, Kayla, and crew. Remember, Rare Genetics, Inc., if you want to get your animals sexed, you can't deny chromosomes. So they have sexing abilities for colubrids, colubroids, all those animals, and then get them your shed skins. They are working on genetic markers, isolating genetic markers or SNPs that are specific to our different morphs. And so that way, if you have a corn snake, hognose snake, or whatever, and you're questioning whether or not it really is a lemon ghost hognose snake, if Ben has enough material, he can basically find the literal genes that make it so, and we can actually get confirmation. The ball python industry has this. It can only help us and legitimize what we're doing as keepers. So Rare Genetics, Inc., we love them. We will absolutely be having an episode with Ben this coming year. That was discussed at Colubrid Fest. That's going to happen. So that's that. So keeping with the tradition of going over literature, I want to go over something that's going to be real important to me in the upcoming semester. So next semester, I've always wanted to do this. And, I've got multiple grants, tons of grad students, running a department, lots of trips. It's totally logical for me to teach a brand new class this semester. But I'm doing it. And I'm teaching biology of snakes. So for the snake nerds out there, first half is just a complete discussion of the snake tree of life with the evolution of snakes, squamate origins, all that kind of good stuff. Second half of the class is going to be snake natural history, physiology, and conservation. So when you teach a course, you need a book. And I wanted to make sure I had books that were easy. I've learned you can get the really big, dense textbooks that aren't any fun and they put people to sleep. I have learned that there's a lot of popular press books that actually sneak a lot of science in there that you don't even realize you're learning as much as you're learning. And I have two, and I'm going to feature both books in upcoming episodes of CCR. But the first book I want to show off is a relatively relatively new book. It's a relatively cheap book. If you like snakes, if you like the nerdy side of snakes, you like snake taxonomy, you need to get this book. And so YouTube people can see the book. It's Snakes of the World, A Guide to Every Family by Mark O'Shea. This is a series. There's Frogs of the World, Lizards of the World, Frogs of the World. Lizards of the World and Frogs of the World, I believe, are also written by Mark. And as a gentle reminder, Mark was the gracious scientific editor of my book, and I learned through the process of his editing that the guy really knows his stuff. So what I like about this book so much is it takes snake taxonomy, which is a little bit complicated to say the least, and I don't like the word dumbs it down. It streamlines it so that it's presented in this book in an extremely organized fashion that is easy to consume. So you end up learning who's related to who's, evolutionarily, what makes this family this, what makes this family this, morphologically, what makes them so, geographically, what makes them so. And so what's really cool, though, is to come up with the book, Mark went through a lot of systematics papers and basically made a call. And I really like his call because it definitely leads to more families of snakes, which, I'm in favor of that. But the way it's presented here is you can learn this stuff relatively easy, and you can go cover to cover on that guy. You can take a look on YouTube. It's about an inch thick with a lot of pictures. Those of you who like your pictures, we've got pictures. But you can probably get through this thing in a week. And so one of the things they do is Mark presents, we've got the Calabar ground boa, Calibaridae, used to be the Calabar python. We now know it's a boa. But for each family, if you're in YouTube, you can see this in the bottom there. You get these nice little highlight reels of just everything you want to know about the family. You also get a range map of the family. And then Mark kind of goes through the iconic species in each group. And then we have some groups that are really diverse, like North American colubrids. Well, he splits them up in a way where you've got the fossorial rodent-eating snakes, the arboreal rodent-eating snakes. And so everything's presented in a way where you can learn and kind of master this broad taxonomy. And if you really want to be a snake nerd, in my opinion, the biological snake nerd, you got to know your families. And one thing I know that I like a book when I learn something, and like I did not know that the Malagasy hognose snakes, Leoheterodon, all of them, the Malagasy cat-eyed snakes, all of those are actually in their own family of snakes. So I'm learning stuff with this book, but it's a fun one. And if you're 18 or you're 60, you're going to get something out of it. If you're 14, you'll get something out of it. I actually bought the lizard one for my son Colin because lizards are his thing and he wanted to start learning about it. So that's that. It's cheap, like I said, so you're not going to like break the bank. So I can't recommend it enough. If you get an Amazon gift card for Christmas and you're like, what the hell do I want to use this on? Buy yourself a book. That's a good book to have. So that's going to be the basis of the PowerPoints that I'm going to be slaving away making all next week because I got to get a jump on this thing before the semester bites me in the butt. So that is our science update. That's my recommendation for a nice little book that goes a long way.
Very cool. I like it. So
right.
One thing that I do want to make sure that we don't forget, and I don't want to push this off till the end of the episode because we need to ensure that our audience knows this and hears this.
This is important. I know what you're about to say.
January 7th,
Yep.
Tuesday, January 7th, 7:30 p.m. CCR. No, 7:30 Central.
So
8:30 Eastern. Yeah, 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern. CCR will have its first ever live episode. So what that means, if you only listen on Spotify, nothing changes. You'll get it just like you always do. However, if you are a YouTube watcher or for this event, if you want to hop on YouTube, we will have the live stream going, and it'll be Zac and I. We already know what we're going to be discussing and talking about. However, we want to be able to interact with you. So
yes, we do.
Please hop on. This is our chance to be able to answer questions, to communicate, to talk with listeners all over the world, honestly, not just the country. And we're excited. We're a little nervous. A little nervous. Yeah, but we've got we've got Max. Max is going to help, make sure to keep us on point and keep everything rolling with us. Yeah, so that's happening. And again, that's January 7th, Tuesday, January 7th, 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern. Please hop on. We will post the link on the website as soon as we have that figured out. It'll be on our Facebook page. And then, of course, it'll be on the MPR Network YouTube channel is what it'll be streaming on. So check any of those areas and you should be able to get it, should be able to find us. It's going to be a good time. Again, you'll be able to comment, send questions right there live in the chat, and we'll be able to communicate with you. So and we've got it mapped out to where we will be doing one of these. I think we've planned 4 next year. Was it that, or was it every other month? One of the two. I don't remember how we have it now, but we will have multiple. Let's put it that way.
Yep.
This will be the first, and we really hope you guys are going to attend and make it a big one.
And if you're going to attend and you want to be there, message us on Facebook Messenger just so we know we should be looking out for your name. So go to the Colubrid and Colubrid Radio page. Just send us a quick little message. We'll make sure we get you the link and all that kind of jazz. Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing on that, we've already talked it out with Max, who is the man behind the curtain here. For those of you that are listening, that are kind of the traditional podcasters that listen in your car and are thinking, how the hell is this going to work? It's live. I know I've listened to quite a few podcasts when they did this. And it's kind of like this kind of conversation in the moment. We already plan on having Max monitoring the chat. We will be monitoring the chat, but Max will be actually like asking questions. So when he asks the question, representing people in the chat, then Clint and I can then respond. So it should, in theory, be just like a normal podcast, because that's what we're trying to do.
And we do have, topics that we're going to be discussing as well. So that's going to be good stuff. And speaking of topics, do we want to introduce what tonight really is? So what we decided we wanted to do with this episode, we've discussed our Patreon, obviously, and the CCR shorts that we release on the Patreon. And it's funny because there's oftentimes that we talk about the content on the shorts and we're like, God, I hate that this isn't out there for everybody, because they're really good. I mean, it's really what we call topical, meaning, we choose something and just really get into it and break it down. And I really enjoy them, and I really think they come out strong. So we decided, rather than taking one of the shorts that we've already done and putting it out here for everyone to hear, which then kind of cost a regular episode to those that do subscribe to the Patreon, because they're thinking we've already heard this. What we're going to do is we're going to do a short now. And this isn't going to take the short over for anyone who's already on Patreon. You're still going to get everything you're already getting. Yep. This is just to give everyone else an idea on what those are like, I guess, kind of what you can expect. And I mean, we cover a wide range of topics. And this is just going to be the one we've chosen to do tonight. And we're going to see Right. And that's what we said that it's going to be. It's going to be a Christmas present for everyone, our Christmas present to all of you. You're going to find out that the shorts aren't always that damn short.
No, we really shouldn't have called them that. We're long-winded people. But the first short we did was like an hour and 12 minutes, and Clint infamously said, we'll keep this to a solid half hour. Can't be right all the time, right? So, But do you want to introduce what we're doing, what the topic is tonight? So we're going to do a topic tonight that admittedly has been kind of done to death, but it hasn't been done by CCR, and we want to do the CCR take on it. and that is naturalistic enclosures as a keeping technique, sterile enclosures as a keeping technique. Now, normally when this topic is presented, it's presented in an adversarial racks versus, bioactive. And we're not doing that because our ethos here is there is a time that naturalistic enclosures absolutely are the best strategy, period, the end, hard stop. But I think it's just disingenuous as hell to say there's never a time that a rack can be used. And so we also want to talk about times that a rack can be used. But at the same time, there's times when a naturalistic enclosure is not really that applicable. And same thing with a rack. So we've been thinking about this topic for a while. I know when we came up with this idea a couple days ago, it got lodged in my meninges, and the brain has been just grinding away thinking about this. And so what we're going to basically do is we're going to give our interpretation of when naturalistic enclosures are good and not so good, when sterile enclosures, we're going to get some definitions here in a minute, are good and not so good. And then the whole point of this is just to make you think. To make you think critically, to make you think, kind of maybe question yourself. Am I emotionally tied to something, and that's blinding my interpretation of how this ultimately can be used? I know I had opinions we'll talk about one of these methods, strong opinions. And I know Clint's had strong opinions about one of these methods. So that's what we're going to do.
And, when Zac just said, hoping to make you kind of think in a different way and maybe just in a broader way, I think if nothing else, I hope this conversation will help some not attack others later, so it maybe softens some future arguments, because it's, I can, even if I don't agree with it, I can see why that individual thinks the way they do or is doing it the way they do. It's just not how I would do it. That maybe that's what some of this this conversation will lead us to. So.
Yep. And then at the same time, there are totally going to be some, I know at least for me, hard lines drawn in sand. You just shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
I do think that is part of the equation as well. So
no, I hear you. Well, let's start with definitions. I mean, that's going to be your category, because there's going to be words that we're about to use that we really need to clarify what they mean, because sometimes they mean different things to different people. In fact, there were some that just meant different things to you and I that we had to, this is what we need to use, for the sake of this conversation.
So there is a body of literature out there, peer-reviewed literature. There are some books on this subject. Some of the authors of said books are somewhat controversial, and we're not going to get into that. And if you just heard me say that, I'm talking about a certain someone. But with that being said,
you science guys are so catty.
Yeah. Oh, we are catty. Yeah. So anyway, but with that being said, one of the words that has been kind of thrown out to describe what we would just call a rack is sterile keeping. And so with sterile keeping, that's the word we're going to use. It actually falls on a continuum, and that continuum goes from extreme sterile keeping, which would be, I have a rack tub, I have a piece of newspaper, a water bowl, and a hide. I don't have any cage furniture at all. Some would even argue it's just newspaper, water bowl, no hide could be the most extreme version. But in reality, that leads people to think then that, well, all racks are sterile because that's the traditional way. You can have that exact same setup in a PVC enclosure, a 20-gallon enclosure. So what is it exactly about the racks that irritates people? It's some people. It's the fact that some senses are being devoid of stimulus. So, if you have something like one of the larger commercial grade racks, I don't want to name names, and you're using the all gray tubs, you're basically blocking out all light or a large amount of light. And so if you have a diurnal snake living in that setup, this is a snake that evolved to be active during the day. It's not receiving any form of light. That's That's a perceived problem. Okay. But the other way to look at it is this idea of heterogeneity within the tub. And heterogeneity is a fancy word for different things in the tub. So there's actually a continuum of sterility in something like a rack, because you could go from newspaper water bowl to aspen water bowl hide. And so that has more heterogeneity in it than newspaper, with the sheer fact of we've just added more choice and control by adding the aspen, because now the snake can sit on top of the aspen, go down to the bottom of the aspen, dig if it's a thick enough layer of aspen and a small enough snake, hang out right in the middle, create a burrow network in there. So when we talk about sterile enclosures, then we have this continuum. So what we have decided for the sake of tonight is when we say sterile, we are talking about the newspaper water bowl hide. And then we're going to use the term minimalistic. And minimalistic would be bedding water bowl hide. And so, but the idea here is you don't have that much stuff in there.
Right.
At all.
And it's also, yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the reasons that I really felt, too, we needed to differentiate those two, is because the word sterile really, I mean, to me, that's a very powerful word. And sterile in my mind is that cage is sterile. That cage is clean. So if you have, let's say, newspaper or paper towel and a water bowl, every time the snake defecates, that's pulled out. The tub for this argument is sterilized, wiped out and all put back in. So that cage remains sterile. Where if you have bedding in it, unless you're doing complete bedding changes for every defecation, which does not happen, instead that's spot cleaned. While yes, you get the majority of it out, there's always still some fecal matter that you can't see that's left behind, some urate that is, kind of went into the rest of the bedding. It's not sterile. That's my point, is it's not sterile. So I don't like calling anything that has bedding sterile, because it's only sterile until the first defecation. Then it's no longer sterile. Where, the paper, yes, that's sterilized every time it's cleaned. So that's why I felt we had to have a different, term for what we're talking about tonight.
So the opposite end of the spectrum from that world would be argued to be what we call naturalistic. And with naturalistic keeping, the way that I've always defined it, and this is more of a Zac Loughman definition than anybody else. So, if you've read the Mendick papers or some of the papers that came out of books written by the individual I said that I will not say, they had some different terms therein. But for naturalistic, you're just basically trying to replicate some form of nature. And it has a continuum. So you could argue naturalistic, you're looking at the natural history of the animal, you're trying to add elements of its natural history. So you might have a PVC enclosure now. You have the ability, this animal has the ability to see out into the room that it is living in. With a naturalistic enclosure, you're going to have a deeper bed of substrate. You might be having a mix of substrate. You are certainly going to have what we call cage furniture in the enclosure. That could be rocks, sticks, vines, things of that nature. You're probably going to have more than one hide, though one hide, I would argue, has to be present for it to be naturalistic, because snakes are intrinsically secretive animals and they don't really want to be exposed most of the time. And then almost certainly with a naturalistic enclosure, you're trying to replicate nature. So heat lamps and heating via light, or maybe an infrared heater, a heat panel, but definitely light is probably almost certainly going to be considered part of a naturalistic enclosure. With naturalistic keeping, there's a continuum therein. You can have naturalistic keeping and have a whole bunch of plastic things in there, plastic plants, which are imitating nature, but a plastic plant is not a pothos plant. So there's a continuum herein. And if you go to the extreme end of naturalistic keeping, that's where you might be doing something like bioactivity, where you have a substrate mix so that when the animal defecates, it's being, overturned and the nutrients from the defecation are going to the soil. There's a cleanup crew. There's probably plants in there. And you probably at this point would have UVB radiation in there, UVA, IR, like the whole kit and caboodle, and you're really trying to replicate nature. So we're not going to differentiate tonight between bioactive and naturalistic. We're just going to say naturalistic, and it implies, that type of keeping. Another thing that's usually part of naturalistic keeping, and it's really hard to apply a defined black-white definition herein, is that you're probably concerned about space. So you are probably going to be giving your animals what you perceive to be ample space. And for a lot of people, it's the enclosure will be at least the length of the snake. Some other people will say ample length is twice the length. A lot of people will go so far as to say there isn't a minimum. You should just get it as big as you possibly can. I've heard that argument as well. So naturalistic keeping, is there. So we're going to present these ideas looking at the life history of a snake. But before we do that, there's one element where you can make an argument right off the bat that we need sterile keeping. So let's just be real, call a spade a spade. Sterile keeping is oftentimes viewed as the negative here, and naturalistic keeping by some is viewed as the gold standard of what we should all be working towards. But when you bring animals in to your collection, it's somewhat disingenuous / unrealistic to say, I'm going to take this brand new animal and slap it into this 8-foot bioactive vivarium. If you're really trying to monitor it and make sure it isn't sick, it isn't bringing in mites, it doesn't have worms, it's growing well, it's eating well. So a lot of people will make the argument, at the very least, we need some element of sterile keeping in a quarantine situation. So
100%.
There you go. I mean, what do you do in the shop, Clint?
It doesn't matter what age the snake is, whether it's a hatchling or it's an old breeder that is coming from the outside into this building. It is going into a sterile container until we know it's healthy. And there's species that I even will talk about that I hate having to do it, but we have to do it. And I'll give you an example of one that it's not a way I would keep this species under any other circumstances other than quarantine. And that's chondros, green tree pythons. So anytime we've had green tree pythons come in, I will put them in a rack system, and I will prop. And we're talking a rack system that's, the tub is maybe 4 inches tall.
Yeah.
And this is even when it's a, subadult, it's about as big as what I've usually have come in. Subadult chondro. Now I will prop a perch in there, and they get that and a water bowl. And the reason I do that is, one, everything you just said, we need to be able to monitor it. 2, everything that comes in this facility is being treated for mites, whether I think they have them or not. Because I'm going to treat one animal for mites. I'm not going to treat hundreds for mites. That's not happening. So with a chondro, if I instantly set it up, even if I set it up in a sterile environment, but with the size cage that it should have, with the height, with the perch, it's harder to treat for mites.
Yes.
Because there's so much air that the chemicals that we're utilizing to knock the mites out, if they're there, it doesn't work as well. They don't really have it. I mean, I tried it. I've tried it before. And there was an animal that did have mites, and it took us months and months to finally, I said, this cage is not working. We had to put it in a tub, and within 40 days, it was clean. And so that's, again, why that I've learned this isn't going to work, under those same circumstances. But yes, everything that comes in here, the only exceptions to that rule, if it's let's say a crested gecko, something like that, even then I'm not treating it for mites, but it's still going in what we would call a sterile container. It's going with a paper towel, a moist paper towel, because then we can see, does the feces look normal? Does is it eating? Is, all these little things. So, I mean, even then it is, like I'm going through my head right now, and the only animals I can think of that I did not put in any type of sterile environment when they came in were those pitayas.
Yeah.
Because they're so damn sensitive that I would rather risk this little area that they're in being contaminated with something and me having to deal with that than doing anything with a chemical on them until I have them completely solid. So yes, there are going to be those few times where it's better to make sure the animal is hydrated, feeding, healthy before you have to go sterile and treat it for anything else. But I'm going to say like 90% of the time, 95% of the time, straight sterile to ensure proper quarantining is the way that it needs to be.
The one time that I did, I would argue it was minimalistic for quarantining is when I was trying to get the velvet swamp snakes established. And those were wild caughts. And the assumption I had the second they showed up is you do have worms. Like it wasn't a, do I need to see if you have worms? It was, you got worms. You eat frogs. You came from Suriname. You got worms in you. So in that scenario, because I knew they had worms, I was going to treat them with flagell. You know, I don't really need to get a fecal to know that. They've got them. And I did set those up in quarantine bins that were just straight onto cocoa chip. And there was a pothos plant in there. I will say it made it very difficult to find the fecal matter that I needed to do my, my fecal floats and figure out which worm do you have. Cause like I said, I was like, you got worms. I know it. And it wasn't easy. But it was, given the fact that I was dealing with these, freshly imported animals that were not doing that well to begin with, I thought it might not be the best to put you straight onto a paper towel with a cracker box.
Right.
But the reason why I was willing to do that is, like I said, I don't need a poop on a paper towel to tell me you got the parasites. I know you have the parasites. And then the other thing about that was I wasn't going to be treating them with flagell right away. Like I knew going into it, I want you to get some food in you. I want you established before we're going to be doing any treatment. So it's still a quarantine tub, and I didn't deck them out. It was just cocoa bedding, multiple hides, a couple pieces of some cork bark flats. That I have the benefit of having a autoclave in a science building, so I could really sterilize those things and make it so nothing could survive. But other than that, though, every other snake that's come in here goes to, it's actually a quarantine rack that I have. And it's, what I do is I have paper towel. I keep every little box that we like, Crystal Light boxes for babies and Cinnamon Toast Crunch boxes for adults. And I will throw sphagnum in there on occasion just to give them some humidity, but yeah, no. So sterile keeping minimum, you can't, I would make the argument that you just can't say it's always the devil because you need it for at least that. Yep. Like that. So, there's that. Now, this next part, we've kind of gotten the one time we definitely need sterile keeping up, we would argue, or a variation on that continuum we were talking about. So I've had this idea floating around in my head, and it's quite possible somebody else has presented this idea. And I've been very busy, and I haven't had time to do the typical nerdy thing that I do where I dive into books and papers and read. But I've been just thinking about the process of keeping a snake. And one thing that I've learned over since when I got back into this, which was right around 2016, 2014, somewhere in that window, is that in reality, a lot of times, if you think about it, if you get a hatchling milk snake, hatchling bull snake, baby false water cobra, if you think about that animal as a baby, and then you think about it over its lifetime till it reaches adulthood, it is the same species of snake, but in reality, you are taking care of the requirements of that animal over time. It's almost like you're taking care of multiple snakes to get to adulthood. And so as animals grow up, there's this idea in ecology, we call it ontogeny. We always talk about ontogenic color changes. Well, everything has an ontogeny. And when you study life history biology, you hatch out of an egg as a snake, you are a neonate, which essentially means you're living off your yolk sac. You would argue like the first year of life for most snakes might be the neonatal phase. When you go from that neonate phase, you increase your body size and you increase your ecological niche breadth, or you might decrease it depending on what species you are. And then you kind of enter this next phase of life we call juvenile. Think about a 10 or 11-year-old kid. They're definitely not a baby, but hopefully they're not having babies. This got weird real quick. But anyway, but you go from a juvenile and then you're maturing, you're getting larger. You then reach sexual maturity, hormones hit. You're now what we call an adult biologically, which means you can reproduce. Once those hormones hit, reproduction shows up. You're no longer biologically fixated on growth as much as you were, because you're now going to be putting a lot of the energy you're allocating from your food into reproduction. Think about how we feed our females to make the fat stores go up for vitellogenesis and that kind of stuff. So you've got a sexually mature adult or just an adult, and then animals undergo senescence. They're no longer growing. They can't reproduce anymore. They're old, but the biological term for that is geriatric. So this ontogeny of keeping is something we're going to be talking about a lot in 2025. And when you look at the life history of a snake over time, and you think about this topic, sterile keeping versus naturalistic keeping, you can make arguments for a lot of the species that we keep that for certain life stages, sterile may be better, or minimalistic might be better. And then other life stages, by all means, naturalistic all the way. So what I would like to do is, when we kind of address this topic now, we're just going to go with the different life stages and talk it out. Good. So obviously we hatch out as a neonate. So I've heard this on a lot of podcasts. Oh my God, the internet threads, the Facebook threads. Holy mother of Christ. It's a very common thing to see something to the effect of, I got a baby Mexican black king snake, and I just put it in my 40-gallon breeder decked out with every plant known to mankind, cork bark tubes, 2.5 inches of bedding. And I'm not against that. Do it. But there's a utility of keeping. You are making your life very, very difficult, I would argue. I'm
going to argue it because I'm the one who's running a shop and has to answer why your snake won't eat. And all these other questions whenever a little bitty snake like that's put in that large of an environment. So, yes. No, this is one where I don't know if we're going to agree or disagree as we go through this, but I've got an opinion on this one. So
he's got the feels.
Yes.
Yeah. So, this is the time in most snakes' lives where not necessarily sterile keeping. I don't think you need to keep that thing on newspaper with a water bowl. I would argue that might stress it out because it's a neonatal snake. Everything in nature eats baby snakes. This is why false water cobras are psychopaths when they're born. Like, they are so damn aggressive, and I always say defensive. I would argue they're freaking aggressive. Like, I've opened tubs before with those babies, and they're coming out, and they're not coming out to get a mouse. They are coming out because they feel, like, I got to make a stance here. So for the neonates, minimalistic keeping. You have your tub, your aspen, your cypress mulch, depending on what it is, a hide or two water bowl, in like an 8-quart tub or 4-quart tub or a smaller tub. That seems to work really well for colubrids. Thoughts?
So for me, what I see is, now I have, it's going to depend on the species. I hope that goes without saying, but we should probably say it. It's going to depend on the species as far as the size of the tub. But for some of the smaller colubrid hatchlings, I've got a couple racks, that one of which is like a sandwich container tub, bunch of those. And then the next is going to be, it's a little larger than that. I would say it's probably around 7 inches by 4 inches by 2 inches tall. Okay. So nothing huge, not a 6-quart. It's not a 6-quart for sure. I've got those as well, but this is much smaller. So what I tend to find works best for us, for a few reasons, I typically put all hatchlings, and by hatchling, I mean exactly what that word says, just hatched. No meals yet, just hatched. I keep everything on. A lot of times I don't even separate a clutch. I'll throw an entire clutch in a 6-quart tub with just paper towels and a water dish. And I do that because, one, I'm letting them go through their first shed. Some of them may still have a little bit of yolk or something, I like to keep it real moist. I can spray it. The paper towels may be slightly damp, and that's how they are for their first 7 or 10 days, staying warm, staying real humid. They go through their sheds properly. And once they shed is when we separate them out. Now, when we're separating them out, we always start them on paper towels. They're going on paper towels and a water dish. Now, the paper towels have enough layer that they're able to get in under, and so it kind of acts as a hide at the same time for them. I find, in my experience, they feed better than if I put them straight on bedding. And I think it's because, one, they do feel secure because they do have the layers. They feel the pressure, of the paper towel on their back. It is a smaller container. I am able to see if it's, even though you're talking about a small tub, when you have bedding, it's amazing how they can hide a pinky.
Oh, they can hide a pinky.
Yes. I mean, so you look in there, you think they've eaten. No, they've buried this pinky, and then you smell it 2 days later. And I thought you ate, but you didn't. So that's one of the reasons I like to start them on a paper towels, because it makes it easy for us to know whether or not they've eaten. We can see if they're defecating. And I'm not worried about, as long as I just want to make sure they did, that's really all we're checking for that first round. Once they've taken their first meal, I used to wait till 3 meals before I did this, but now we've kind of moved to, if they've taken their first meal, we can probably go ahead and move them on bedding. But even then, sometimes I notice that kicks them off feeding. If that changed. So that's where that 3 rule that I used to apply, that's why I did it in the beginning, is because once they've had 3 meals, then their metabolism's kicking. They're usually going to continue eating. Another thing that I notice, if you're keeping them in smaller tubs as hatchlings and you put bedding in it, I think they don't feel as secure because they tend to pack that bedding down and then they can't get in it as easy. And so I think they are a little more stressed out because they feel a little more exposed. So it's, not always, but go ahead.
One of the things I do with the bedding. So I actually, starting next year, I'm going to experiment with paper towels. With all the king snake babies, I actually put things onto bedding, but the buried pinky mouse, holy mother of God. And the problem with that is you miss it, you don't know it's there, and then the damn forward flies find it. And it's amazing how many forwards can come out of one dead pinky.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And it seems like that I had a trip this summer where I fed everybody, and it was like the 3rd feeding. I got cocky and was like, everybody's eating. And I don't know what the hell happened, but all those snakes that were eating were like, yeah, no, I'm not eating that. And then I ended up having some pinkies go like 5-6 days. And by the time I got back, it was rough. And had I had the paper towels, it would work. But what I've gone to now is I use cocoa chip, a Reptile chip, the big chunk. They actually, I know you sell this. They sell the baby chip bedding, and I actually got that and didn't like it because of what you just said. They packed it down. So I just used the breeder block, the kind of classic, and at least for all the animals that I had, which were the Japanese rat snakes, all the lamps that I had, the Getula Kings, the false water cobras, all the rat snakes that were born here this year. It worked out well because since the blocks are so big, they can't actually pack it down. And so that gave them all the little interstitial spaces they could get into. But yeah, no. The one ecological group of snakes that I would argue a naturalistic type enclosure might be better is for colubrids that are strictly arboreal, so they go up. I know that Roy Blodgett, when he has his Spilotes sulphureus, he will oftentimes put them in an exo, like the ones behind me, smaller ones, and basically give them cork bark tubes that go vertically, and then a bunch of branches, and they will actually rest like they would in nature, kind of in a crevice or up against those. And then those things are so sassy that when you take the pinky and dangle it in front of them, they defensively strike, and then they'll defensively strike and feed. So there are those. And I would also argue false water cobras are so damn big and so food motivated that I could see starting them out in like a 10-gallon aquarium, because I have. That is kind of decked out with naturalistic, but the thing that's leading me to that decision is the biology. Like, this is a larger baby. This is an animal that historically, soon as that thing smells frog, it's on it. So maybe, but it's not like your typical baby milk snake or king snake, rat snake, or corn snake, where we just got to get some meals into them. Now, if we get those meals into them, they are going to grow. And they are going to grow and become juveniles. So for the purposes of tonight, I'm going to argue once the snake has doubled in size from its hatchling size, we are now at a juvenile. And it's not going to double in size if it hasn't eaten a lot. So we've eaten a lot. We've doubled in size. We're 4 or 5 months old. This is probably the point where there's the most overlap between making the decision of, all right, you're going to stay in the tub forever, or you go into the naturalistic vivarium. So I'll lead on this. So one thing that happens a lot is, this baby snake has been raised in the tub. And that's kind of the industry standard. Whether it's the right way to do it or not, we're not saying that right now. But But it would be disingenuous to say that's not the way that most baby colubrids or their first months on planet Earth are spent in herpetoculture. One thing that will oftentimes happen is you try to take the snake from a tub to a tank, and then it immediately freaks out. And some will argue, see, there's the evidence that we should be putting it in a vivarium, a naturalistic enclosure, because it's not eating now. We've done some experiments at the school that show it's just too much of a change. If you take the tub to the tank, put a hole in it, and now they can go from the tub to the tank and the tank to the tub. We've done that before at school, and what we have found is you end up getting the best of both worlds. They have that commonality of what they know, which is the rack tub, but they also are able to move out and explore this new area. And it then leads to that transition into the vivarium to being a little bit smoother. But let's just say, we get that kind of argument out of the way. I would say it just depends on the snake. I think it's just disingenuous at this point to say it's fine that they live in the rack and it's fine that they live in the Viv. It's the snake. Like here at this house, false water cobras, if I can get them out of a rack tub, they're out of a rack tub by the time they are 14 inches long. Now, there are absolutely false water cobras right now that are 14 inches long. They're at the university. I'm not happy about it. We use them in experiments. When you do science, you actually need to have standardization of care, and that's an example where the rack tub will be used for them. But falsies, alert, diurnal snake that's moving around, active pursuit predator. It's not living in a tub. Lampropeltis, like an alterna. This is a nocturnal snake that we know does do long-range movements, but doesn't do them often. Lives in crevices and has an area that it explores that's a couple square meters to 10 square meters. Maybe the rack tub's okay. I don't know. John Lasseter talks about this, And he gets a lot of credit because this is my confession. And I was at one point a vehement racks are the devil kind of guy. And then Matt brought on John, did the interview with John first time, and he was talking about options. Got to give him options. And then I did something crazy. I put my ideas aside and listened to a guy that had 20 plus years of experience and actually heard, wow, okay, this is kind of like interesting how there are more options in that tub. And they're in pretty big tubs that are like twice the length of the damn adult snake. Now, I didn't think like, I just thought, and it got my brain thinking. And now I obviously use racks. There's one right there. So, you know what I mean? But there's also a vivarium right there. So, that's that.
So I've had my moment as well. I'm going to talk about that more once we've moved to adults.
Yep.
And changes, because it's fun. We've both experienced that because of this show.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm certainly hoping we're not the only two who have done that. So, but yeah, I think you make a very valid and interesting point, because it's one that I don't really think I've taken the time to consider before. And that's because, again, that's a question and something I deal with a lot, being that I deal with the public so much and newer keepers where, same, they take, a young snake, they put it in a very large enclosure. And right now we're talking about colubrids, but this is even more so when it comes to like ball pythons. It happens all the time. And, I'll tell them, put them in a tub. Like for ball pythons, I call a 6-quart tub the magic box, because put it in there and it's going to eat. It happens almost every time. Someone will have a snake. It's not eaten in 3 months. They bring it to me. I throw it in a tub. 10 minutes later, it's eating. And so it's the magic box. So, but I'd never thought about the taking, having a hole in the tub and letting it, because it's, again, in the wild, they have all the space in the world, that they want to go, and they survive as long as they don't get eaten. And so why is this a problem in captivity? And you often get told, well, you got to throw more stuff in there, clutter it up, and they feel more secure. But, it's still hard when you've got this little 12-inch worm, in a big 40-gallon, aquarium, and even finding the prey is difficult. And
that's the issue. You just nailed the issue. That's it. You're giving them too many options. You're not giving them too many options. I don't like that statement. So before people flame me for that statement, I don't like that statement either. You're giving them a lot of options, but you are making it more difficult for you to present the prey to the animal without having to disturb it. Because if this little worm, like you said, and that's a great word, juvenile snake, is up in a cork bark tube, you are the keeper, and there's got to be, whether we like it or not, a utility of keeping here where the keeper isn't this pseudo predator that's in there ripping apart this enclosure, trying to find this little corn snake to give it a pinky.
Yeah.
Like,
I think there's
if you don't know where the animal is and it can hide everywhere, then you got a problem.
Yeah, so I think there's also another piece that we don't take into account enough, and that's okay. In theory, when we just said out in the wild, they're going to have to go find that prey. Nothing's presenting it to them. Nobody's putting it on a plate. How many generations removed from the wild is your animal? And its entire life before you got it, it had been given its meal, and so now I'll make the point where, okay, we're adults, right?
Yeah.
And guess what? At some point in our ancestral history, someone was having to take a spear and go kill its, they didn't have guns to go hunt like we do. They didn't have bows, they're going to go spear something. And that's how they got their meal. Now, I challenge how many of our listeners could go do that right now. So that's again my point. They're so far removed from the wild. While they may have some of those wild instincts, they're not good at it.
Yeah.
We're not good at it. So
Mhm.
there's still a disconnect there that we have to keep in mind. This is a captive animal, and captivity is all it knew.
Yep.
All it knows, all its mother knew, all its mother's mother knew, and so forth. So,
But the biology is really important. Like garter snakes. I have right next to me, you can see the corner of it. This is the tank that when I got those red-sided garters, I took them out of the 40-gallon breeder that the adults are in, which is a bioactive, naturalistic tank. And I knew the biology of garter snake. Garter snakes are active, alert, and they're exploring. So since part of their biology is I explore my environment a lot, I could afford to put those brand new babies in a 20-gallon long aquarium decked out, because I knew if I put fish, something that's going to give off a lot of smell, they're going to be able to find it. Whereas if we take some of the rat snakes, sure, they smell, they do explore, but they're less inclined to explore as much when they are tiny. Think about when you're herping, where you find these things. You find them under bark when you're peeling bark in a pine flatwoods, or very rarely do you find them outside of the hour at sunset. Like there's just this one period of time where they do a mass movement. And so understanding the biology of the animal also should dictate whether you're going to be putting it in a sterile or a naturalistic setup. In that case, I knew the biology of Thamnophis, and I knew that they were going to probably be able to find the food. I knew they would orient towards feeder guppies if I threw them in there because of the movement, and sure enough, they did. So, in that instance, this larger enclosure was fine. So I just think you got to know the animals.
Yeah, and you have
to. The big thing is just mitigating stress. Whatever's going to get rid of the stress and make you be able to present them the food they need to grow. That is probably, and then have them comfortable enough to eat said food. This neonate juvenile stage, this is like the one period of time for most snakes where it might be better to go more minimalistic or more basic on the naturalistic, just to make sure you've got them going, if that makes any sense at all.
And it's, while you're wanting them to adapt to this bigger and new enclosure, you've got to be willing to adapt to that animal.
Yeah.
And change with it and help it get to that point. So, it may not be able to go full throttle for you yet. So you have to throttle down to be able to get it where it needs to go. So I agree.
So now our juveniles are growing, and we could even go to a large juvenile. We would actually call that a subadult in biology, to an adult. This is the point where things get kind of interesting.
This is where I think the heavy debate starts, and and this is where I will tell you my mentality has evolved over the past couple of years since opening the shop. I mean, I started like all the rest of us, that have gray in the beards, with aquariums, with bricks on top of screen lids, and still losing the snakes and all that. So I went from aquariums to this new concept where you could keep all kinds of snakes in a smaller room if you just built this thing, these rack systems. This was the new thing. And I mean, I remember my first rack system was built out of 2x4s, and I think I was 12. Maybe 13, I don't know. But so I grew up in that age where racks were the thing, and then they got better and better, and I mean fancier and prettier, and I mean they different sizes, and the heat now it goes up the back, or now it's in the rack. It's it's all this neat stuff. So rack systems for me were that was the thing. And cages were a lot harder to clean. I mean, it's, so for me, racks were the thing for so long. And I was always primarily a snake keeper, so lizards and anything else, not so much. So after opening the shop, And that's when I first started to dive into bioactive enclosures for so many different species, but mainly different lizard species, frogs, geckos and stuff like that. And then, okay, here, let's do one bioactive for snakes. I want to see it. And that's where we put the trio of green bush, and they've got this nice big Exo 36 or 36 by 18 by 36. And so anyways, as the show continued to develop and, episode after episode, we talked to Chelsea,
Yep.
Islander, we've talked to Kayla, and we talked to so many individuals who keep very, naturalistic enclosures from some of the, I guess I don't even want to call them common, but some of the more often seen animals, such as blue beauties. Now, you can find blue beauties pretty frequently. Chelsea keeps, hers in naturalistic, to the Egyptian false cobras that Kayla keeps, in the naturalistic. So it's really opened my eyes in a different way, where before it wasn't you shouldn't keep it. It was, you don't need all that. It was that was more my mentality. You don't need all that. I'm not disappointed for you if you do. It just, they're fine without it. They do the typical old school thought process of they're eating, they're breeding, they're healthy, they must be fine. And I now will say, after concentrating more on the behaviors of the snakes to a much bigger degree, 2, the advancements in the understanding, or at least seeing the behavioral changes with ultraviolet light being added and included. And even the difficulties of things like subox, and seeing, how I struggle with those in rack systems. I will tell you right now, at this store, I have animals in racks that I personally don't think should be. Now, I can't fix it overnight. I'm working on it. We're building new cages. Things are going to be getting upgrades, and now it's picking one. And I'm talking even black rat snakes.
Yeah,
I have some large black rat snakes in CB70s at the moment that I'm like, you need a cage. You need bigger. I want to see what happens when you've got some UV. I mean, my mind has shifted in this direction. Now, I agree with you, where I guess my thought on it is any species is probably going to do okay in a naturalistic environment if done correctly for the species.
Well, you said it before I did.
I think if done correctly for the species.
Yeah.
Now,
but that's the hard part. That's the part.
That's where the friction and the disagreement. Right. And now, sometimes, things like, again, I'm going to throw ball pythons again. From everything in my experience with them, they tend to do better in a rack system. They feed better in a rack system. They'll breed. I'm not saying if you move them up to 4-foot enclosures that they won't, but they tend, anytime someone has a problem, even with an adult ball python, and I put them in a smaller enclosure, they tend to feel secure and they start eating. They start doing what I need them to do. I do think that there are snakes that are more secretive, that are high strung, that do much better when they can't see you.
Yeah.
And it's not when people say, well, but then they're living in this, tub all their life, or they're in captivity. At the end of the day, they're in a cage all their life.
They're in a box.
Yes. Some boxes are bigger than others, but they're still in a box, and I think that there's some that if they're going to be in captivity, if they're going to be in a box, they tend to do better in a box where they can't see me.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with the naturalistic keeping. So when I have learned that it's more situational keeping, and the situation is this house versus the school versus Metazotics versus an enclosure in California versus the guys down in Florida. Like, there are certain animals, given the scenario, where the minimalistic tub style of keeping might do better, and the vivarium might do better. And I've lived this. For me, I thought it would be really neat to do a bioactive enclosure that had bamboo rats in it. I full circle. First time I ever texted you, I bought that pair of pulchra from you, and I had raised them up, and they did great. They were raised in the rack you can see behind me, and those things, you know, I tried to make their tubs more than just a tub. I knew they were semi-fossorial where they live in Asia, so they had a mix of cocoa chunk and cypress mulch to kind of have that moisture. I went outside and got leaves for them and crunched it up. And then I have a bunch of clam shells, and I don't know what the hell it is about clam shells and those damn things, big honking clam shells. I just laid them on top of each other, which gave them a bunch of hides, and then they had a water bowl. And those things did amazing in under those conditions. This room stays at about 70 all year long. They grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. So we're talking about what we just talked about, how, you know, we got them past the neonate phase because I got them as babies. The juvenile phase, they're doing great. And then I took an Exo-terra, decked it out with only Asiatic plants. I mean, I went full nerd on that thing, and I put the biggest one in there, and then it proceeded to go and dig down underneath this begonia, and then I didn't see it, and then I would try to give it the pinky, and then it would get like hyper defensive, and then I thought, well, it's, you know, crepuscular, so I'll just leave pinkies all over the tank, and yeah, it was a nightmare. And I thought, you know, well, it's inevitably going to break. Like, at some point, it's going to eat. It didn't. It didn't. So I pulled it out, you know, invariably. It started to look a little thin. Put it back in the tub, and it ate 6 hours later. So, and then for its entire life, I've since moved those on. I put them in a bigger tub. But at the same time, I'm not saying tub keeping, because I was inspired to do that bioactive after seeing a couple posts on advancing herpetological husbandry, where a guy was like, hey, here's my bioactive tank for my bamboo rats. Look at this. They do really well. So he was in Europe. I'm not saying you had to be in Europe to keep them in a vivarium, but in his scenario of keeping, his bamboo rats did great in a viv. My scenario keeping, some juju about this house they didn't like. Meanwhile, with dipsadids, I like to keep dipsadid snakes. Those would be the Barron's racers, the musaranas, the false water cobras. The big dipsadids, they're all in vivariums. There's a Baroni in here right now that's in a 4-foot 4x2x2. I got a bunch of false water cobras right over here that are in 2x2s growing up. Their whole backs. They could be in tubs. I moved them out because I like keeping them better that way. But there's one that I personally have tried. I have tried to keep them in a display tank. It's tricolored hognose snakes. And I was inspired by Roy Blodgett, who keeps his in beautiful bioactive. He has replicated the Paraguayan Chaco. It's so inspiring to me. And I was like, I'm going to do that. And then my tricolors were like, yeah, we're going to die. Like, we don't want that. And I was like, oh, you know, I tried, but then I was forcing my will upon them, and they put them back in the damn rat tub where I didn't want them to be. And they just thrive there. I've tried to move them into vivariums at school. I've tried to move them to vivariums here at the house. These snakes, if you keep tricolor hogs, you know what I'm talking about. They literally come up out of the tubs the second you open the tubs to get mice. And I just don't know what the hell it was about that setup for me. But Roy's able to do it. So this is where I think it just, maybe out where Roy is, there's less humidity. You know, maybe there's too much humidity. I don't know. Maybe there's a barometric pressure difference. I don't know. But there's something about that seclusion.
Maybe it's the pair.
Yeah, it could be those individuals.
Right. And that's what I mean. There's so many, pieces to it. It's even whenever I talk about, whether this species is okay in a rack or should be, in naturalistic, sometimes I could walk into, okay, so if I go in the nursery right now, we have holdbacks, and we have holdbacks that are, most of them are going to be maybe 12 to 18 months. And most of them are going to be in 28 quart tubs.
Yeah.
They're waiting to be moved into the North American room, the Asian room, the whatever. And it's funny because, like, as I look in, and these are they're not like polycarbonate clear. They're more opaque, but you can see in them and they can see out of them. There will not be a milk snake at the front of any of those tubs.
Yeah.
They're going to be buried. They're going to be in the back. They don't want me to see them. They don't want to see me. F you. We aren't friends. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's a species where I think they are probably going, if they're going to be in a naturalistic environment, they're going to be hidden the entire time. They aren't going to do well with seeing me walk by. They're more high. And that's a very common species. We're talking Hondurans, Pueblans, any, Sinaloans, Nelsons, they're all going to be hidden. And so I probably wouldn't go naturalistic with them. Now we could talk about something that's, closely related. Cow kings. Yeah. There's a lot of times they're like their eye pressed against, just watching me as I'm walking by. Same thing with some of the Florida kings or the black rats. So a lot of those, they would either, yes, I think they do well in a naturalistic, or they could even go in, I don't want to call it a naturalistic tub, but something that goes a little further than the minimalistic tub experience with more enrichment, but even a clear tub, because I think they would actually enjoy more of that stimuli that they see, moving around.
It's funny you say that, because I think it's ARS makes a rack where you can use Cambro tubs, which are the tubs you use in like the food industry. Yeah.
They're polycarbonate material for those who it's a harder plastic, but it's clear. And in fact, just so everyone knows, if you have impact shatter resistant lenses in your eyeglasses, those are polycarbonate. It's that material.
There you go. We bought one of those at the university for our male hognose snakes, and we decked those tubs out like they're little aquariums, and they kind of are. I've oftentimes thought, and I talked to a couple of the big time rack makers, and there just doesn't seem to be interest. But like those Cambro tubs in particular, I feel like there is a way to make a large industrial rack and have it be a naturalistic rack. Like a male hognose snake is not a big snake. A male Western hog, a big one is like 14 inches long, but they're also thin and skinny. Those tubs are pretty, long if you just embedded some LEDs, and then if you really want to get inventive, UVB. The problem with the UVB is it's so close to the substrate that you would have to be real careful with the whole making their eyes go to hell.
It'll probably also yellow out that polycarbonate over time. The UVB would. I will say, and shout out to Andrew, who we've mentioned before on the show, and I know he listens. Andrew is he's a friend here locally. He was just in the shop today. He's the one that donated the bow at Clubert Fest. Great guy. He's also, I mentioned before, he's an engineer, and he tinkers all the time with different things. In fact, I've got a bag next to me that in the PVC cages, the 4-foot cages, they're designed more to hold humidity, and I want to put pine snakes in it. And so what he's done is he's made me these 3-inch vents that I just drill through, and I'm going to use 4 of them to have airflow, out the sides. Well, he took a VE rack, and he's gone through. He's got lights installed in the rack. He's got to where he's cut out a hole in the back of the tub that when you slide the tub in, it pushes up against this. It like fits perfect into the hole so that nothing can escape. He's got airflow that is forced through. I mean, it's really neat. And so there is so much that could be done to further the utilization of a rack system and still implement some of these new ideas and things that we're talking about that we would like to see done. It's just, a manufacturer deciding they want to take the risk and the expense, because, and honestly, the manufacturer would have to take the risk, but then it's up to us to pony up and show them that that's what the audience wants. That's what everybody out here is looking for. It's because it's not, there's nothing wrong with finding that happy median, because something else that we have to really say, because if you are anti-rack, rack should not exist. They burn them all, eliminate them from the planet. Okay. Mexican black king snakes are now $2,000.
Yes.
Because there's 5 guys in the country who are now breeding them, because those are the only guys that have space to do it. And that's something that we do have to understand, is that rack systems do exist, not just from those who are keeping a dozen snakes in their basement. It's happening on some of the larger scales that if they didn't exist, there's so many animals that would not be available in the hobby. Or if they were available, they would not be in any way an economical purchase for any of us. And I'm not saying that the ends, justify the means, because there is, as we just established, there's a lot of different ways an animal can be kept in a rack that ones could argue, an individual can argue is the right way or the wrong way to be keeping that animal in the rack. You can still give it a better quality of life if you're doing it. So they certainly have a place. There's certain species that I agree with you should not be in a rack. They need something bigger. They need something better. And I think all would be better if we could give them, this area and that, but they both serve their purpose. I mean, period. They do,
with naturalistic keeping too, you can kind of go, you can have wonderful intentions and poor implementation.
Yeah.
And I will say that there is a reason why at West Liberty University, the snakes that we teach people how to take care of snakes are not pitayas. They are corn snakes and they are bull snakes, because I have watched people with these beautiful, you look at them at face value and you're like, oh my gosh, that 6-foot-long vivarium with that beautiful background and the substrate and the plants is great. But then you start getting into the parameters and, somebody doesn't understand wattage on light bulbs. And then you open up you slide the glass and you get like, whoosh.
It's like opening a car door when it's 90,
what
right?
The hell? Yeah. It's like the 7th circle of hell in here.
Yeah.
And then you got a power sunlight up there, and then way too much UVB.
Yeah.
So there's
it's humid as hell, and that's where the bull snake's going, right?
You got to have the nuance there. But in defense of naturalistic keeping, one reason why I would argue doing it is worth doing is it's freaking fun. I absolutely love coming in here after a day, doesn't have just a day, and I set up. I keep pointing if you can't see because you're listening to the podcast. The vivariums that are right next to me, I set those up for Florida Kings, shocker. And what I had done is I went down to the cane fields of Florida, drove around looking for Floridana. We found them. And I might have brought back a bunch of the coral rubble rock that they line the canals with. And I might have brought back some dirt because I love dirt, and figured out what the substrate looked like. And I put all that in there and laid down fake plants and real plants and actually have them in there doing this thing called cryptic basking, where they'll coil up and like 80% of them's under a rock, but there's like 3 coils exposed to the light. That is, to me, just as cool as watching them destroy a mouse. Because we know that is a natural behavior that these animals do, because I literally have seen snakes basking that way. And so there's an endorphin hit because I'm seeing a naturalistic behavior in a box. There's also this little piece of perception that the snake obviously has to be content because it's doing naturalistic behaviors. Whether that's true or not, that can be complete BS. I think that there are times where we kind of put a little bit too much on that piece of things, but just keeping the snakes this way is more fun. Like, I don't care who you are. If you've got your collection, if you have hundreds of snakes and they're all in rack tubs with aspen bedding, a hide, and a water bowl, it gets monotonous when you at some point you open the tub. This is Florida King 1. Close it, Florida King 2. It's just not as much fun. I know Kelsey, when we talked about her, she and her big enclosures, that's the joy of it. So if you don't have lots of snakes, why not give them?
Oh, absolutely.
This?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand the point in having a collection where you don't employ this type of keeping, because it's when you really get the true joy. I've been raising Drymarkin in here in vivariums and Texas indigos, and I've got an Eastern in this room with me right now. And it's really cool to watch them. They've learned, along with the false waters that are in the same stack as them, the door opening, they have figured out that, like, that door, there's an association. The vibration of that door, there's a possibility of a mouse. Can't see that in a rack tub, but there's one day they cracked me up because they all have the Reptile basic hides. And I opened up the door, kind of came in quickly, and they all, like, boom, their heads came out. And they're like, oh God, it's that monkey. And then boom, they all, like, pulled back in. But you just can't see that in a rack. So that's another major reason why keeping things in vivariums, and then you add the naturalistic piece, it's just more fun. Like I so there it is.
Yeah. I think all in, as we said, it's, if you take away anything from this episode, take away that every piece has its role, and it's going to be right for some animals, wrong for some animals. And every keeper is, just because you do it one way or the other doesn't mean that someone who does it different is bad, lesser than you, or wrong. They're doing it different. Now, there are plenty of things to judge them on. Trust me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take that away from you. You're welcome for that. But it's just simply, if you are a naturalistic keeper and someone is using a rack, they're not a bad person. If you're using racks and someone is a naturalistic keeper, they're not an elite snob.
Yeah.
At least not just because
unless they're acting like it.
Right. That's what I mean. So it's, either one of those people could be complete a-holes. I don't know. Yeah. But just because that's how they keep their animal, that's not what makes them the a-hole. Okay.
If you're keeping an 8-foot Carinata and a CB70, that's not okay.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm sorry. It's not okay. I have definitely seen some false water cobra keepers where they're keeping their snakes in CB70 specifically. And I'll flat out tell you, that is full-blown cringy to me. There have also been times at the university where we've had them in CB70s, and they were only the length of the CB70 tub. And I was really hoping we could get the study done so I could get those animals out to forever homes so they weren't in the CB70 tub. But you put, I don't know, an Alterna in a CB70 tub, and, this fossorial snake, and you give it the layers and you do what John said, that's kind of like a mansion to them. So I just think that you have to be willing to admit that there is just bad for all and good for all. And the ethics of keeping in, welfare, that word for snakes, it's really funny because one side of our hobby has embraced it 100%. And then there's a lot of people that definitely do it. They kind of focus more on the minimums of welfare instead of like the ultimate of welfare. And then there's this other side that when we start talking about enrichment and welfare, they get like defensive and crotchety. And I'm sorry, there's just no room for that. You should give cut myself. You should care about the mental well-being of your animal. Like, that should be part of it. So just think about things. But you can also keep an 8-foot Carinata in a 4-foot long Viv.
Oh, absolutely.
And you got a problem. Like, just because
Yeah.
it's in a vivarium doesn't mean it's better. That snake needs an 8-foot, 6-foot, big old cage. That's basically all there is to it.
Yep.
So, yeah. So as you can see, this is CCR stance on this. And geriatric snakes are essentially adult snakes. So,
yeah,
you know, that's that. Now, what you do with geriatrics when they're non-breeders is a whole other conversation, and that could potentially be a future short. So do you have anything else to add to this one?
No, I think that we've covered every avenue that we should, on this particular topic. So
here is your free short if you're not a Patreon listener, your additional short if you are. And if you've been keeping tabs, our short lasted an hour and 8 minutes because I would looked at the clock.
They're typically an hour. I mean, that's usually what we're hitting.
Yeah.
So,
and there were things we didn't cover. You know, we're not claiming to be experts. This is just supposed to be a conversation that creates food for thought. That's what we do. So, all right, man. Well, yeah, I'm ready to put this thing to bed.
You got it. I think this is going to drop on Christmas, right?
Christmas, maybe the day after Christmas, maybe Christmas Eve, depending on Eric's schedule.
So this is our Christmas present to everyone, and then that means that the very next day. So this is our last episode of the year.
Yes.
And as a reminder, the first episode of the year is going to be live Tuesday, the 7th, 7:30 Central. So be there and let's make it special. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
I can't. I mean, we're going to talk more about 2024 and 2025 on the show next episode, the live show. But man, it's been a hell of a year. I mean, it is so wonderful. We're going to have so many things to point out and kind of recap on and look back at. And I just can't thank the listeners enough. I mean, the messages, it's wow. I mean, from us both.
There's nothing better than, and I don't want to paint a picture like my job is horrible. My job is not horrible. The absolute best part of my job is being with my students 100%. But I have to spend a lot of time away from them in these interesting things we call meetings. And there's nothing better than when we're in like the 47th minute of a 3-hour meeting and we haven't moved on from point A yet. And then my phone goes ba-ding and it's a listener saying, hey, listen to the show. Good point, blah, blah. Boom, I'm right back in it. And so thank you all for doing that. And, we had one of our listeners who's really, he listens to everyone we have and he gives us the good and the bad. And I don't want you to flood us with the bad, but he made very valid points and made our show better when he was like, hey, you're not talking about this. I really feel like you should. And that gave me something to think about.
Yeah.
And I know that he cares about our show. And so if he wants to make it better, we value your opinion on all things. So we're thankful for you. We're thankful for the Morelia Python Radio Network and hosting us. So Eric and company, thank you. I don't know if you can hear my dog. He's going ballistic because he hears me. But with that being said, yes, thank you. So if you want to get a hold of me, you can find me at Zac Loughman, Facebook, Dr. Crawdad, Instagram. If you listen, you know where all the places to find me. West Liberty University, where I teach. It's going to be a big year with West Lib because I have 2025 is the year where I'm like, all right, I guess I am a herpetologist, throttle down. So lots to discuss therein. Where can they find you, Clint?
You can find me on Facebook at Metazotics, Instagram, it's MetazoticsLLC. You can check out everything that we have available at metazotics.com. As a reminder to everyone, please use coupon code CC Radio at checkout, and that way you save yourself 5%. You can always email me as well, or find me personally on Facebook, Clint Bartley. And as Zac said, I can't tell you how many messages open up when they're going to ask about a snake, but the first line is, hey, we love the show. I'm like,
Yep.
Oh, gosh, I just love hearing that. So,
Mhm.
So thank you guys.
Yes. Thank y'all. So happy holidays. Happy New Year to you. And be it morning, afternoon, evening, or night, whatever time it is for you, have a good one. Bye-bye.